You wake up with a headache. Nothing dramatic. The dull kind you'd blame on bad sleep or too little water. You reach for a glass from the tap, maybe a painkiller, and by lunch you've forgotten it happened. Now take the tap away. Take away the pharmacy, the container of clean water in the fridge, the doctor you could call if the ache turned into something worse. What's left is a headache with no ceiling on how bad it's allowed to get. Now do the same thing to a scraped knee, to a cramp in your stomach after a strange meal, to a twisted ankle a mile from anywhere that could be called home. None of these would end your week today. You'd barely mention them at dinner. Each one, on its own, could have ended a life 10,000 years ago. Not because ancient people were fragile, but because every single safety net under those ordinary mishaps has been quietly installed by the last 2 centuries. And it's easy to forget it's there until you imagine it gone.
So let's take it away properly, one hazard at a time, and look at what actually filled an ordinary ancient day with lethal potential. Start with the wound that never bothered you. A thorn scratch, a cut from stone tool making that went half an inch too deep. Without antiseptic, without antibiotics, a break in the skin was an open door for bacteria, and the body's response, swelling, fever, spreading heat under the skin, was itself dangerous, not just uncomfortable. Bioarchaeologists studying ancient skeletons regularly find bone lesions consistent with chronic infection, evidence that people lived for extended periods, fighting battles their immune systems didn't always win. There's real debate over exactly how common fatal sepsis was in any given population, since bone only records infections severe enough to reach it. But the pattern is consistent enough that historians of medicine treat untreated wound infection as one of the single largest killers across almost all of human history before germ theory. The scariest wound was never the deepest one. It was the one nobody thought to worry about. Then there's the risk carried disproportionately by half the population: childbirth. Hemorrhage, obstructed labor, and infection following delivery were, for most of human history, dangers with no surgical or antibiotic backstop at all. Estimating exact ancient maternal mortality rates is difficult and contested, since skeletal evidence is patchy and indirect. But paleodemographers broadly agree the risk was high enough to shape entire social structures around it. Birth attendants, herbal knowledge, and communal support weren't customs. They were survival technology. It's easy to picture ancient danger as an animal in the dark, teeth and claws, and a chase through the trees. For a huge portion of ancient humans, specifically for every person who ever gave birth, the most dangerous single day of their life happened indoors, surrounded by people trying to help, in the most ordinary act imaginable. No predator required. No warning either. But there's the danger everyone pictures first, and it's rarer than the myth suggests, though not absent. At Swartkrans Cave in South Africa, a skull fragment known as SK54, belonging to an early hominin relative who lived roughly 2 million years ago, bears 2 puncture marks in the bone. Their spacing matches almost exactly the canine teeth of a fossil leopard jaw found in the same deposit. Researchers still debate the exact species involved, but the physical match is hard to argue with. Something with fangs that size closed its mouth around that skull. It wasn't an isolated freak accident either. Leopards are known to favor prey around a certain weight, small enough to drag into a tree, and early hominins fit that bracket uncomfortably well. Humans didn't start out at the top of the food chain. For a long stretch of our history, we were simply the right size to be someone else's dinner. Cold did its own quiet killing, with none of the drama of teeth or claws, and no warning that felt any different from a normal chilly evening. A single freezing night without adequate shelter could bring hypothermia, and the reverse, a day of hard exertion in extreme heat without enough water, could kill just as efficiently through heat stroke or dehydration, sometimes within hours. Neither requires an unusual climate. It requires an ordinary climate
and an unlucky combination of exhaustion, exposure, and thirst. Modern search and rescue statistics still show experienced, well-equipped hikers dying from exactly this combination in a single afternoon. Take away the equipment, and an entirely normal day of travel or hunting becomes a math problem where the variables are body heat and water. And getting the sum wrong doesn't offer a second attempt. Food itself was a gamble, run daily. Meat spoiled fast without refrigeration. Some plants were only edible after specific preparation that had to be learned and passed down correctly. And parasites picked up from contaminated water or undercooked meat could cause illnesses, draining the body of the exact fluids it most needed to survive. None of this required rare bad luck. It required an ordinary meal made slightly wrong on a day when the body had no reserves to spare. The line between a meal and a threat wasn't always obvious until it was too late to matter. There's a smaller, quieter danger hiding in something as mundane as a toothache. Paleopathologists examining ancient skeletons across sites and time periods repeatedly find heavy dental wear, cavities, and abscesses, pockets of infection rooted at the base of a tooth. Today, that's an appointment and a course of antibiotics. Without either, an abscess can quietly spread infection into the jawbone, the bloodstream, or even the space around the heart. And researchers studying ancient remains generally treat dental infection as a meaningful, if underappreciated, cause of death across much of human history, particularly once agricultural diets brought more grain, more sugar, and more grit ground into the food itself. Nobody pictures a toothache when they imagine how ancient people died. That's exactly why it was so effective. Physical accidents filled in whatever risk was left over. A fall from a tree while foraging, a kick from a wounded animal during a hunt, a slip near open water with no one nearby to help. These injuries didn't need to be dramatic to be fatal, because the real danger usually came afterward. A broken leg that would be a routine cast today could, without any way to immobilize it properly or fight the resulting infection, become a slow death sentence. The initial accident was rarely the whole story. What killed people was often the weeks of vulnerability the accident created afterward. And then there was the danger people did to each other. At Nataruk, near Kenya's Lake Turkana, archaeologists uncovered the remains of roughly 24 hunter-gatherers, dating back some 10,000 years, many showing blunt force skull fractures, embedded projectile points, and injuries consistent with a violent, unmourned death, bodies left where they fell rather than buried. It's one of the oldest sites some researchers point to as evidence of organized intergroup violence, though other scientists have pushed back hard on that interpretation, arguing the evidence could reflect something less like coordinated warfare and more like a single, brutal encounter. Either way, the bones make one thing undeniable. Whatever safety existed in numbers, it was never guaranteed. Sometimes the deadliest thing near an ancient human wasn't hunger, cold, or claws. It was another person, close enough to trust, on the one day trust turned out to be the wrong bet. Here's the part nobody mentions when any one of these gets its own dramatic retelling. Almost none of them killed alone. A minor fall became fatal because it happened far from help. A small wound became fatal because the following week brought a fever with no food stored up to survive it. Ancient death was rarely a single catastrophic event. It was one ordinary misfortune losing its normal ceiling, then quietly compounding with the next one before anybody had time to recover. Survival wasn't about being strong enough to beat any single threat. It was about never once letting the threats stack. So go back to that headache, that scraped knee, that stomach cramp after questionable food. None of them are a story on their own. Not now, and arguably not then either. What made an ordinary ancient day into the deadliest one wasn't a single dramatic disaster. It was the quiet removal of every safety net you didn't know you were standing on, one at a time, until an unremarkable Tuesday was the only thing standing between a person and the end of their story. Getting old, back then, was never proof that someone had been strong. It was proof that, day after ordinary day, they had simply never once been unlucky.